Welcome to Wild, the podcast for wildlings just like you. Wildlings who want to transform the prevalent plant blindness to collective plant wisdom. My name is Lieve Galle. I've been working as a herbalist and wild plant forager in Belgium since 2002. In those years, I've seen a lot of changes. Working with plants has become more popular, but I've also seen time is running out for our planet. As foragers and herbalists in Europe, sometimes we're dealing with different plant species and different cultural approaches towards plants. In some countries, working with plants is licensed, and in others, it's almost illegal. I believe that together we can learn from one another and be stronger. There is nothing more empowering than connecting wild souls. Together, we can have a greater impact on restoring the ancient link between people and plants. And that's why, for this podcast series, I'm talking to fellow herbalists and foragers in Europe. So if you are ready to find out what you've never been told, but what your soul already knows, welcome to Wild. Welcome, Wilde, to this new episode of the WYLDE podcast for wildlings working with plants just like you. And today I have a guest from Sweden, Lisen Sundgren. Am I pronouncing that right?
You are pronouncing that very well. Thank you.
Listen, how did your journey with plants get started? Was it something that was already present in your childhood, or has it developed later on in life? Tell us.
It's a combination. I grew up, in a outside of Stockholm in a house with a garden, so it was easy accessible for me to go out and forage for nettles and dandelions and all those fairly common plants. And also my grandfather was very botanically interested, and he taught me the botanical names of plants. He was like, that's very important to know, it's Bellis perennis and Myrrhis odoratum, and so that's always been with me in a very natural way. We used to go foraging for blueberries and wild strawberries and things when I was a child. So it's always been a part of it's in my DNA. So later on, the herbs really took me into their world when I've always been interested in eating healthy foods and curious about what makes me feel good, So I was living in London and Paris and New York as young, in big cities, super active life and very ambitious. And I was living in New York for many years, where I got interested in yoga and health and herbs for a little bit, but then I was burnt out. And I went back to Sweden. And the only thing I wanted to do, the only thing that I could sort of visualize or just do, because I was just, everything was very dark, I would just go out into the forest every single day. And eventually I started getting curious about the plants around me. And after that, I did a 1-year herbalist training where the wild plants were a big part of it. And so it just grew from there. And then I started working at a place called Rosendal's Garden in Stockholm, which is a biodynamic farm. And the herbs, wild as well as cultivated plants, I just, it was still like I couldn't see anything else. I was completely drawn in by their scents and tastes and beings, So eventually, to make a very long story short, I changed my path from acting to becoming a herbalist. And that was in 2000. So
I think it's totally fascinating that your grandfather actually taught you the Latin names, the botanical names.
Yeah. But I don't know how it was in Belgium, but in Sweden, in the olden days, the kids in school had to learn. They had to make a herbarium. So they would go out and gather specific species of plants and press them, and put them on glue them onto a piece of paper and write they had to learn the botanical names. They had to write where it was found and what date. And so that had been a part of his childhood, and then he carried that with him all his life.
And does it still happen in schools?
No, but I think it should.
Yeah,
It
I think,
should.
yeah, it's pretty similar in Belgium here.
Yeah.
The older people, I still have some herbaria of older people that
Oh,
gifted them to
wow.
me, and I think it's so precious.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know why this suddenly stopped, because to me, it's learning an essential skill about the world that you're living in.
Exactly. And that we are part of.
Yes, and this is a thing that hasn't changed. The
No.
plants are still the same, and
Yeah.
so I don't know why they stopped doing this. It's
No, I think it would be great if they picked it up again, because it does remind us of our symbiosis. Without we are part of nature, so we are nature, and if many people today forget that, so they think that we can just take what we want from nature and live in our cities far from the wild, and still have food and clothes, but we won't. We need the plants for our survival, and because it makes us feel good to hang out with the plants.
absolutely.
It's good for your health and for your mental health, and especially for kids today that are so exposed to social media and frames, and
And
it's
so
probably
overwhelmed, really.
oh
Yes, they don't have any rest and peace and
mm,
quiet in their brains anymore. And I think it's urgently needed that they just spend much more time in nature.
yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is working with plants as a herbalist and a forager, is it like a common thing in Sweden? Something that is still done traditionally, or is it more of a rare thing?
It's, when I started doing workshops and things 24 years ago, um, it was not common. But, it was an older generation that held the knowledge, because when they were young in the 70s, there was the green wave.
Mhm.
So then it was cool to grow herbs and forage and eating dandelions and nettles and all that. And then it was the generation before that, with my grandmother, who was born in 1919, I think. She lived through two wars, one war, and learned to grow vegetables and tend sheep, and also use wild vegetables, because it's what they had. So when I started, no, it wasn't very common at all. And I remember my first wild walk that I was teaching. I think it was pouring rain, and I think 3 people came. And I'm so I'm so grateful to those 3 or 5, I can't remember. We were walking around with our umbrellas, and I was talking about goutweed and nettles and yarrow and all those things. Very enthusiastic. And since then, I've done hundreds and hundreds of wild walks, because I've noticed the growth over the years. And something happened about 15 years ago when the new Nordic kitchen was launched, which was a big thing. And then the chefs, because prior to that, like in the 90s, I remember crossover kitchen, when it was uh, trendy to have the whole world gathered on a plate, eating crocodile from Australia and mango from Taiwan, everything, the whole world should be on the plate. Today, that seems just outrageous, right? So with the new Nordic kitchen, chefs wanted to use what was grown locally. And ideally, they want to, take their bike to the nearest farmer and dig up their own carrots and, bike back to the restaurant and stuff. But, and so they also opened their eyes to the wild food, because, it brings, chefs think about flavor foremost. Me, I can be like, oh, it's nutrition, but it's like flavor. So um, the wild foods have some of the plants have really exceptional flavors that are a good complement to the cultivated vegetables. So I started foraging for restaurants and teaching chefs, how to you know identify plants and how to use stuff like that. So um, when that sort of that era opened up a whole new world, because people, they go to restaurants and found yarrow leaf on their plate. They'd be like, "Ooh, this is very cool." And so then there was a whole new interest, and I started writing books about the wild plant. I wrote 3 books about wild plants, and the interest just grew and grew and grew. And during the pandemic, people couldn't hang out indoors, right? So they had to spend time together outdoors and looking for things to do. So me, as a forager and as a nature and forest therapy guide, I was super busy, during the pandemic. So the interest really grew because people were spending so much time outdoors and wanted to have something to do. So, and I think there's many reasons why the interest is growing. It's because some people are preppers, they want to be prepared, for the worst. Great. Others are more sort of lifestyle oriented. It's like, oh, I like to hike or hunt or whatever it is they do. And then they want to be able to pick their food. Others have more sort of health, approach, and are looking for the nutrition and the variety eating and more varied diet and blah, blah, blah. So, and others are more into sustainability. So it's beautiful because it doesn't really matter what door you choose to go into, as long as you find it leads to nature, right? It brings us
Yes.
home. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, from what I hear, it's pretty similar in Belgium
Yeah.
also. And I have to say, I love to have chefs on my foraging courses because
Yeah.
you're right, they think in flavors, and it's
Yeah.
so interesting and so enriching to, you let them taste something and they just start, oh, I could combine it with this or with that. And they just make combination that I would have never thought of.
Yeah.
So it's always very inspiring. Yeah.
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 Yeah. It was so funny. I don't do it so much anymore, but while I was foraging for restaurants, I would come with my bags through the kitchen door and leaving my bags there. And I felt like a bag lady and, with soil on my hands. Of course, I washed them in the kitchen, but, then I would go and eat there, and just to see what they had created,
Yeah, just this
you know.
it's amazing. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So is there in Sweden a difference in like basic botanical skills in more remote areas, you think, than in cities or?
I think now it's getting better, but I think the skills have been pretty poor, actually. And I think it's because we don't have that natural interaction
Mhm.
with nature. And now, because the interest is growing, people who have been foraging for a month and just learning are like, oh, I'm a forager. But I remember there was a chef who once was like, oh, I found this great plant. It tastes like oyster. I'm going to use it in an oyster dish. And it was was it in English? It's sippa. It's part of the ranunculus family. So it was a toxic plant. So, it's like, do you really have to know what you're doing if you're going to serve this at your restaurant? But in general, yeah, I find it's quite mixed, but I always try to start from the very beginning at my walks, because some people haven't, there's, of the concept plant blindness.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. And I find that's extremely common. And so I always encourage people to start with the plants that they do know. Like most people will know dandelion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most
And they
people
can
will
do a
know
lot
nettle.
more with that than they would have ever imagined.
Exactly. So why try to learn 30 plants in one go? Start with
Mhm.
1 or 2 plants that are easily available to you, and then go from there. Because there's also there's the plant blindness that's an issue, and also learning becoming intimate with a plant and learning what time of the year is which part best. Like if you take dandelion, for example, yeah, you want to take the leaves, but not in July.
Right.
I mean, you can,
Yeah.
but they taste, if you're a beginner, take them in spring.
Yes, when they're less bitter. Yes.
Exactly. And then the root is, before and after bloom, and the bud when it's a bud, so you have to, so I always encourage people to go slowly because, the knowledge it's not so deep.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, I remember people asking me about flowers and seeds on plants, and they said,
Yeah.
wait, Lieve, are you telling me that in order to have a seed, you have to have a flower first? Like
Oh,
that is
dear.
the order in which it always
Oh,
happens. And I thought, whoa, this is like next level plant blindness, really.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's kind of sad, really. It's really sad how
It's
far we've come
horrendous.
from nature. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really why I do what I do. I think it's great that, and, to be able to say, it's great to share recipes and stuff. But for me, it's more about the experience of going out in nature and being in search of plants,
Hmm.
because that's when you have to slow down.
Right.
You can't be in a hurry.
Hmm.
And you can't be in a hurry when you pick the plants, because you have to, be conscious of how you do it and how much can you take and da 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 da. And suddenly you hear the birds and you may be feeling the sunshine on your back, and suddenly you're breathing a little deeper and suddenly you're like seeing new things with this little plant, like,
Hmm.
wow, I never saw that nettles, the hairs are actually all going in the same direction, and to me, that's the adventure.
Yeah, it's about being in the here and now,
Yeah,
whereas in a lot of other aspects in our life, we're just constantly distracted by
yeah,
social media and other things that just
yeah,
make us to another place or to another time instead
yeah,
of being in the here and now, which is
yeah,
really all there really is.
and focus on one thing
Right, exactly. Yeah.
without being interrupted and tempted to go on
Uh-huh.
Instagram
Uh-huh.
and also, I mean, herbs are slow medicine, so herbalists also use herbs for medicine, and most of them, I mean, some can have an immediate effect. Like if you need something for sleep, yeah, you can take valerian or something, and that's great. But most of them work over time,
Mhm.
so they're really teaching us we have to get to know them. They work
Mhm.
over time. Not all plants are right for us. Like some do really well on lemon balm for sleep. Others do really well on yeah, valerian or passion flower, and you
Mhm.
have to sort of learn what dosage is right for you.
This
And
is
we're
like the
not used
opposite
to
of the
that.
instant gratification that we have all the time.
Oh,
It's about
yes.
patience and about slowing down. And
Yeah.
yes, this is medicine in itself already, I think.
Yeah. And that's why when people ask, so okay, so what's healthy about this plant, and what are the active ingredients or what nutrition is in there? I'm like, but it's so much more
Mhm.
than just the active ingredients or the minerals or
Exactly.
even though they are important. But yeah, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, as a Belgian herbalist and forager, I can only dream of the amount of natural spaces that you still have in Sweden compared to
Yeah.
Belgium.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Of course.
However, I think most people, and it's probably similar in Sweden, most people still live in cities, not in the
Yeah.
countryside. So, are there enough green areas for people in more urban spaces? And are there
Mm.
like urban foraging opportunities? Or
Mm. So now and now there's more herbalists and foragers around. So I think we do have, Sweden is beautiful that way, that we do have a lot of green space. And I live in Stockholm. I also have a cottage in Sörmland. And so I have a lot of opportunity to forage, because here where I live in the city, live near a big, huge park where I can go out and
Mhm.
forage. And we have what's called allemansrätten. You
Yeah,
don't
I was
have that
thinking
in.
about that because I've heard that on some conditions you can even forage on other people's property.
Yeah,
Like, is that a thing?
I know.
Okay, tell me all about it.
Yeah. So allemansrätten is a beautiful thing. It means in English, it's all man's right to access. So it means that we are allowed to gather plants, leaves and flowers, but not and mushrooms and berries, but not roots or branches. So we are allowed to do that, even on private property, which I don't recommend people to do when I teach, because I think I wouldn't want anybody to go into my garden and pick my dandelion. So I always say, ask kindly, ask politely. Probably nobody's going to say no if you ask, can I have your dandelion roots? you know? um, but yeah, so the law is, there's a lot of private forest where I have my country house. And yes, I am allowed to go there and forage for sure. And I do. But with that said, and the allemansrätten, it's not a law, but it's just, it's something given to us for us to be responsible for. So it also says we should not destroy or bother, like we shouldn't bother animals, for example, or and we shouldn't, if you find a whole patch of, I don't know, sweet woodruff or wild garlic, don't take the whole batch, because the plant, then you are spoiling the plant's ability to grow back, So I always say, don't take more than 10%. I know that's very little. Some people say 20, some people say 25%. I think better to take less.
I'm in team 10% as well. Yes.
Yeah. And leave the rest for the plant so it can keep living and regenerate. And there are other animals that are dependent on these plants. And there are insects that are dependent on these plants. We can go to a shop and buy food. They can't. So, and we need for those insects and animals to live so that we can live healthy lives on this planet. So, it's all interconnected. And I also think it's a great idea to cultivate, if you have the opportunity, if you have a piece of land, grow some of those wild plants, because it's not going to be sustainable that if, the more foragers around there's going to be, it's not going to be sustainable for all of us to just go out and forage. So I think if you have a piece of land, grow your own nettles.
Yes, I advise, I give the same advice to people, and also it's increasing the biodiversity in the gardens of the people. So it's a win-win situation, and you don't have to go a very far distance just to pick your wild vegetables. So it's
like a kitchen garden. Yeah. So keep a wild corner in your garden, and some piles of wood for the insects. And
what I love about the legal frame, it's that it's a right, but it's also a duty. Yes, it has both sides, and that's how it should be.
Yeah.
I know that I read about former kings in Ireland. They had to marry the land, and I just love this whole concept.
They had to marry the land.
They had to marry the land, like just like you say to your husband or to your wife, I will take care of you, I will be good to you, I won't harm you. They did the same to the land, and I think that's such a beautiful concept.
I love that, because what happens is I see foragers abusing that right that we have, and taking the whole patch of wild garlic or whatever it is, and for selling. And what we also see here in Sweden, which is a problem, is that people are throwing garbage out in nature. So I always say, in the olden days, indigenous people would give they would first ask for permission. Can I, the plant spirit, can I pick you? Or can I use you? Can you help me? And if the plant said yes, it was okay. And then afterwards, they would say thank you by giving something back, like some indigenous people in America would give tobacco, or like I heard a story where the people who lived up in the mountains in South America would give a shell from the sea to the plant in the mountain, and vice versa, because it's a gift they couldn't go and find themselves. So our way of reciprocating, I can't speak, giving something back, is, I think, by picking up garbage.
I'm telling the same to my students.
You are. Amazing.
It's nice to see so many similarities, really.
Yeah.
I think, and sometimes they post pictures of this, my students, and I see just trash bags full.
Yeah, I know. And it takes 5 minutes. Yeah.
It's really appalling.
Yeah.
I don't understand people who are, and I think this is the mind shift that we have to have, because some people will ask the question, yes, but why would you forage in a place that has a lot of trash? But the real question is, why are people throwing trash on food?
Exactly.
That is a mind shift we should really have about people thinking about nature. And it's crazy how people can they don't mind really, and they just throw their trash out.
Yeah. And I think this is part of the lost connection. Is people think they can throw garbage on the ground because they don't really care what's going to happen with it. They don't realize that, in fact, they're cutting off their own foot, because in the long run, it's going to harm us, the way we treat nature, So I think that's part of, or a symptom of the whole problem of the lost connection, which is what I think foraging is. Foraging is not so much, for our part of the world, we have such an abundance of food. So I think for us, the foraging is more about making connection.
Right.
Nature is to listen, to learn from the plants, to be still, to come back, to come home to ourselves. And for that, we don't need such huge amounts of plants, but it's the doing, I think, that
yes, and coming home is a good word for that. It's like this sense of belonging.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of the whole, and yes.
Yeah. And then there's the whole issue, of course, with eating wild, about we get a more varied diet by eating wild foods in season, and it's good for them microbiome and all that. But yeah.
So I was wondering, when it comes to the use of medicinal plants, how is that legally worked out in Sweden? Is it like a gray zone thing, or is it like an officially registered thing, licensed thing, or how is that?
Yeah, it's a little complicated, because you can't make a nettle tincture and sell it and say this is great for cleaning the blood or strengthening the bones, or you can't make any claims. And I think it's a whole EU thing, and in the States it's even worse. So but you can sell Coca-Cola to children anyway. But I'm doing a lot of research right now because I'm writing a new book, and there is quite a lot of research these days available. It's just that, I can write about it in my book, but I can't sell a product making claims, So I think that's a lot why I do what I do. I teach, I write books and I teach so that people can own this knowledge for themselves and use it to maintain their health. But I did just today find a report about how actually there is a lot of science done on nettle, and St. John's wort and meadowsweet and rhodiola. That actually shows that they do work for, like the meadowsweet, that it is anti-inflammatory and pain relieving and stuff. So it is coming because we need to have new alternatives to some medications, because some of the medications are so addictive or they give so many side effects. So, but again, doing the research costs a lot of money. So there is, but it's happening. And some of the research I do now is on cultivated plants like lavender and lemon balm and rosemary and basil. But it's happening. It is happening. And the difference with the wild with the plant using the whole plant as medicine, for example, nettle, is that if you get a medicine from the pharmacy, it's probably they've extracted one or two active substances from the herb, right? And so it's very, very high concentration, which is more harmful for the body. So that can lead to side effects. But in the whole plant, there are so many constituents that work together synergetically, and plus they're much lower doses. So you have to really take a lot to get, like valerian, you can take quite a lot without getting nauseated. So it is happening, and herbal medicine is still a big part in the world. I mean, it's 80% of the world's population is still using herbs for medicine because they don't have anything else.
Yeah.
So
how is that in Sweden? Like, do medical doctors or do hospitals ever use herbs?
No, but it's funny because I had a doctor's appointment recently. I had to do a checkup, and because I get really low, winter is a really difficult time for me, and seasonal affective disorder, and so I take a lot of herbs in winter. And I was talking about this, and he said, because I don't want to take antidepressants, because it's not like I get a heavy depression, but just life runs out of me. I say and laugh, but anyway. And he said, well, we can actually prescribe St. John's wort. And then he looked it up, and then he said, oh, and now we can't. But so it seems like St. John's wort is on and off right now. But it has been, that was new to me, because I know in Germany, doctors can prescribe herbs. But so it's
interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like allowed and then forbidden. And
yeah. So I went, and because my own St. John's wort, I was out. So I went and bought some more St. John's wort. And I said, my doctors approve. So yeah, but it's happening. There's a great website called Herbal Reality, and it's a doctor, Simon Mills, and some other very cool people who are working with it. And so they have monographs on each plant, and they have a lot of research links for, references to the research. So it's very accessible, but you can also find the research there if you want to go really deep. So I see it all over the place. It's coming because it has to, because we can't keep living the way we do. So
yes, that's right.
And the herbal medicine is cheap if you make your own stuff. I have a small little garden here in the city. It's like 4 square meters. So I'm going to have a herbal garden there with just calming herbs. And it's not going to cost me a lot to plant them. And then I have medicine for years to come.
Yeah.
It's
and I think it's good to grow your own or to gather your own. A long time ago, I wrote an article about this for Plant Healer magazine. And because in Belgium, the medical care is it's a very well-established system. So the government pays back most of the
Yeah.
costs of the medicine
Yeah.
and of the doctor's visits. Um, However, it means that yes, I was comparing this in a case where um, I was having Lyme disease, not the
Ah, planning.
chronicle type, but just the acute type.
Mm.
So it was not that hard to really get rid of it.
Mm.
But I thought, hey, if I take these antibiotics, it cost me like only 2 or 3 euros.
Yeah.
If I don't have my own herbs that I can gather, that I can harvest, then I have to go to
Mm.
the health food store to get some
Mm.
tinctures,
Ah,
which will be like at least 15 euro for each tincture bottle.
yeah.
So, um, and I could see when I was traveling in the US, I could see this because their social security system is not
Yeah.
as good as in Belgium,
Right.
that people are more into herbal medicine because it is always the cheapest
Yeah.
option, pretty much. So, yeah, and it's not that I'm against this social security system,
Mm.
totally not.
Mm.
But I think it would be nice if like herbal things would also be included.
Yeah, I absolutely, and we have the same thing. We have a great system. Medicine doesn't cost, most medications don't cost much. But I think, and I'm definitely not against, modern medicine, because it's not black and white. I
Of
think,
course not.
and I'm always concerned about saying that, because there's some people seem to think that it's either or. But if I break my leg, I'm not going to go to a herbalist.
Exactly. I
If I
mean,
get a heart
if I
attack,
need surgery, I'm going to be so glad with the anesthetics of modern medicine.
yeah, and somebody can do the surgery.
Yes,
You know?
exactly. So I really think it's a complementary thing.
For
And
sure. And I think the herbs really come in. I use them. I never recommend them to treat diseases, because, then you have to really have the person there, and that's too complicated. So I really believe in herbs for maintaining health and supporting your health and preventing getting sick in the first
yes.
place. And then after you had your broken leg mended, or after you had your heart attack, then, what herbs can support me to get
Mhm,
better
mhm.
and to restore. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, definitely a combination. And some medications are saving lives for sure. There's no doubt.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because I think, like in the case of the antibiotics, and
Mm,
also I'm not against antibiotics, they have a
mm,
time and a place,
mm.
but I think the whole environmental cost
Yeah.
is not reflected in the price that people pay for it.
No.
And whereas if you use herbs, well, the environmental impact
Yeah.
on like the water system is just
Yeah.
pretty much non-existent. So
Yeah, exactly. And imagine if, because I think it's heartbreaking to see, how many, I mean, I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect, but, I cook my own food, and I cook it from scratch, and I try to eat a varied diet and a little bit of everything, and organic and all that. But, there's so much we can do to support our immune system, for example, and our nervous system. And if that was more prescribed, to exercise more, spend time in nature, and eat healthy, and don't smoke, and don't drink too much alcohol, and do drugs,
yes.
then we wouldn't need to spend so much money on many medications. So there is, lifestyle, and also, herbs work best in combination with lifestyle. So we can help the herbs help us by, uh, getting our daily sun. There's no sunlight today, but at least there is light. Getting my exercise, doing my yoga practice or meditation or whatever it is that hits your heart. Um, by eating fairly well, and just taking care of yourself, because then you can't expect the herbs to work if you drink 10 cups of coffee, and you smoke a pack of cigarettes every day, and think, oh, the St. John's wort is not working. Ooh, I wonder why.
Well, this actually reminds me of another podcast that I made, and I was telling about somebody who was asking me for herbs to protect him against lung cancer, and I was a bit surprised. And I said,
Okay.
okay, where does this question come from? And he says, well, I'm a chain smoker, but I do not want to get lung cancer. So I'm looking at herbs that can protect me. And so, of course, I replied to him, nothing will have the same impact as quitting smoking.
Exactly.
It's obvious.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is the same, it's like this whole picture of chronic stress,
Yeah.
movement, good
Yeah.
food. Yes.
And maybe stress reduction being top, the most important thing to deal with, because that's what causes so much disease.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and
I
it's,
think it's really underrated as a factor on our health,
yeah,
chronic stress.
yeah, I think so. And sleeplessness, but that comes as a result of the stress. So,
Mm.
yeah, it's complicated, but and that's, I think, also the herbs and the foraging is a great tool for teaching these things. Because the most common questions, I'm sure you get the same questions, are what herb can I take against my, for my headache or for stress or for this and that? And then you have the opportunity to say, well, you can take this herb, but you can also combine it with, try to get your 8 hours of sleep. How can I do that? Well, then you can teach them how can they get their 8 hours of sleep, and how, sleep hygiene, and if you take a 40-minute walk every day, then the herbs will have a better chance of working. So it's a great tool for inspiring people to
Yes.
take care of
Yeah.
themselves.
So the next question is a
Hmm?
bit personal to you. What is the one plant that you think should get more fame? A plant of which you think is totally underrated?
Well, oh, gosh, it depends on season and day and weather, but I think overall, that nettle is such a great plant, because it can take care of so much. Because mainly it's probably the because it's so nutritious, that it helps our health so much. Because many of our issues and imbalances can be because of lack of certain nutrients. It's quite simple. So, and the nettle can clear our bodies from toxins, which can support the joints. It will remineralize us. It supports our skin, nails, hair, and the nettle seed. It's also an adaptogen, and the nettle seeds are also very effective for that. And an adaptogen is a plant. That, but just so the listener doesn't feel left outside, it's a plant that can support your body, and your adrenals, and it's a support against the effects of stress. So it can sort of make the symptoms a bit milder. And nettle is a great one, and nettle is a food. So you can eat it as a food. You can put it in your freezer. You can dry it. It's easy to make a nettle soup or a nettle pie or nettle risotto or what have you. And if you want to take a cure for 6 weeks or so, you can make a really, really strong infusion with a lot of nettle that sits overnight. You make an infusion that sit overnight. It's almost like a green soup when you drink it in the morning. And then you drink that throughout the day, to sort of remineralize and cleanse and support your liver and digestion, and it's easily accessible. Most people can tolerate it, and some people who have problems with their kidneys should avoid it. And also, pay attention to how much you can tolerate. But generally, it's considered a vegetable, so you can really eat it. And it grows. It's prolific. I mean, it grows everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. And the nettle seed is a great. It's actually specific for the adrenals. Yeah. So after, like when you're burnt out, washed out, exhausted, and your adrenals really need support, because they've been just producing, stress hormones for a long time. Use nettle seed. You can eat a teaspoon a day, or actually a tablespoon, or make a tincture.
Yes, I agree. Stinging nettles. We should all just be eating that a lot more. It's
Yeah,
so easy to identify. It grows everywhere.
yeah,
It's perennial. So if you have a
yeah,
garden, yeah, I remember when I lived in my previous house, we had a smaller garden, and I just had 1 square meter of stinging nettles,
yeah,
and just the amount of harvest that I got out of this
yeah,
1 square meter, because you just cut it off, and then a couple of weeks later, you have the same amount again, and you can
yeah.
again harvest. So yeah, it's an amazing plant.
Yeah, it is. It is so beautiful. And so, of course, many people are scared because they're like, oh, but it burns. Yeah, but you can use gloves and a pair of scissors.
Mhm.
So, plus, I think they're good for keeping the mood up because they actually contain endorphins and acetylcholine. What is that in English? Um, my mind goes blank right now. But
I
yeah,
didn't know that about the Andor.
yeah, yeah. So it is a great plant, and tasty. And then, you know, I right now, it's what is it, mid-February. I am craving nettles. I can't wait for the fresh nettles. By October, I am so fed up with nettles. And then I only use them like in infusions and not so much for food. And then winter goes, blah, blah, blah. And then comes February. I'm like, I can't wait for new nettles. So,
Yeah, I love the seasonal thing about foraging,
yeah,
how you start to crave certain things, or how you just know that, oh, I can only harvest it for this 2 weeks, and it's just
yeah,
like a precious treasure that you're
yeah.
harvesting. Yes, I love the whole seasoning.
And also that way it's hard to, because some plants you shouldn't eat too much of, but
Hmm.
eat them, once in a while. But then it is hard to overdose on plants that are available for a short time, and you eat them and then you go to the next. And then you
Hmm.
go to the next. And that's, we don't eat strawberries all year. We eat them in summer. you know,
Right, as it should be.
as it should be when they are at their best.
Uh-huh.
So with the nettles, there's no risk of overdosing because unless you really eat them every single day of the year, but you don't eat anything every single day of the year.
Hmm.
Or we should,
Hmm.
we should eat more
Yeah,
than.
and you can just add it to everything, like even to
Yeah.
tomato sauce. You can just add
Yeah.
them. You can add them to any kind of soup and dips
Yeah.
and on spreads.
Yeah. We're a
Everything.
smoothie or pesto or anything, but do collect the seeds.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's a bit of work.
I love the seeds.
Yeah. They're amazing. And I put them in salt sometimes with toasted sesame and
Aha,
yeah,
nice,
yeah. So
nice.
it's
So speaking of seasons,
mhm.
last year I had a Dutch woman that lived in Sweden in my foraging classes, and she made me very much aware. She said, "Well, the plant species that we have here in Sweden," she said, "are like 80 to 85% the same as in
Mhm.
Belgium and in the
Mhm.
Netherlands.
Mm.
However," she said, "a big factor is the time frame in which we can
Yeah.
forage, because obviously the winters are a lot harder and
Mm.
longer."
Mm.
So I was wondering, how does that affect your foraging? Like, do you harvest more in summer to dry or to cook?
Yeah. Yeah. So my busier now, I'm not foraging so much for restaurants anymore, but I forage for other reasons. So um of course from when the nettles come, like April, maybe March, April. May is super intensive. But then with that said, it depends. I don't try to forage a million plants every year.
Mhm.
Like I focus on, okay, this year I'm going to focus on sweet woodruff and nettles, and that I know what I use every year, more or less, and then maybe I add something new. So I know this year I'm going to go for the nettles and the sweet woodruff and linden flower. I do a lot of roses and rose hips. So May, June is super intensive, and that's when I do most of my workshops also.
Mhm.
And I'm foraging for an event in May, and they need 2 kilos of nettles. That's no problem, but they also need 1 kilo of mixed, herbs for salad. 1 kilo is a lot. It's Yeah. So there's many occasions like that. So I try to focus on what I need for myself. I try to spread that out over the year. And then, yeah, so May, June is intensive. And then, of course, with the St. John's wort and red clover, and yarrow are plants that I pick. But I can pick them mostly all summer, like June, July. And then comes August, September with the rowanberry and elderberry and rose hips, and hawthorn. Of course, I love hawthorn. Very good for the
Yeah,
heart.
me too.
Makes me happy. Yeah. So that gets pretty intense then. Um, and then in winter, I can take a walk without looking at the ground all the time, which is a bit of a rest. But we can forage here because now, for example, the rose hips that are left on the bushes, we can still forage all winter, although they're a little wrinkled, but the flavor gets more intense. So I make a soup
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
rose hips. And I can also forage still, pine needles are great for making a pine needle infusion, which is very uplifting and warming, which I like to.
I love just the smell and the taste of it.
Isn't it amazing? But if you drink it in the summer, it's like it's a winter flavor, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a winter thing.
Yeah. So no, but I think it's good to have, to rest in the winter and um winter is for, like, this winter I'm writing, doing research, thinking, doing podcasts. Um and I kind of like that rhythm because in spring and summer I always have that, it's like a pull. I feel like I have to go, there's always something pulling me, from
Yes, and the
to go out and
days are
forage.
longer, you have more energy.
Yeah.
It's like the natural cycle of things. I would not want to be caught up in a job where I had to do like equal efforts in the winter than
Right.
in the summer because it doesn't feel natural to me.
No.
Yeah, so I'm really happy with this seasonal effect of.
Yeah. And that's also another beautiful thing about learning to forage is that you do get that natural rhythm with nature.
Mm,
Because even if I go out now, I still connect. I look for the
mhm.
buds and something sticking up there, or what's under the snow there. But yeah, to have that break. Now it's time for hibernation still.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love how you say that you focus on certain plants, and I think that's also part of being more skilled and
Yeah,
experienced
yeah.
forager. Like, we had not last summer, but the few summers before that, it was very dry, and we hardly had any
Mm,
elderberries. So I just didn't gather the elderberries.
right.
I thought the birds need them more than we do. Last year we had a really cold spring, so I didn't harvest any flowers,
Hmm.
especially early spring flowers, because I thought, the insects will really be
Yeah,
starving and they really need them. So these are kind of the things that you develop when you
for sure.
experience them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's exactly how we need to harvest sustainably. And I think that's why I think nature is foraging is such a great way to learn how to use nature's resources. I don't like the word resources because they are there for their own sake. But anyway, um, in a balanced way, because when you go out and forage, you see immediately the effect of what you've done. If you take all the plants in one batch, they will be gone.
Yeah.
So you're exactly right. We need to be mindful. If there's no rowan berry, we don't go for the rowan berry. We take them for next year. You know.
I'm just curious, what do you use rowan berries for, or how?
Ooh, I love rowan berry, and I think
I mainly
that's.
use them for my voice, for the throat.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like a
Huh.
concoction for the throat. It's really wonderful. You're
Mm.
using them.
Yeah, and they're another underestimated flavor. I love that bitter sour flavor, and I can eat them raw and make people go, "Ew." But that's another thing that the plants can teach us is different flavors. But yeah, so what I like to do, my favorite thing I think is to I put them in the freezer overnight and then thaw them and mix them with just a little bit of honey, like only enough to make the berries like a little sticky, and then add a pinch of salt. And I put it in a clean jar and put it in the fridge for about a week. And then the honey and the salt will pull out the liquids from the rowan berries, and that becomes like a little compote or something. And you can eat that with anything.
All right.
Really delicious. Because then you have added the sweetness, so they get a little more palatable. And I've also made shrub or oxymel, with honey and honey and apple cider vinegar. And I let that sit for a really long time, like months. And I get this bright red liquid, and it tastes like Campari.
Oh, really?
I know. So and then I take a little bit with carbonated water, and it's like a cocktail.
Wow.
But it's non-alcoholic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is something I've always heard about rowan berries, that if you make something with it, like a rowan berry jelly,
Yeah.
and you let it stand for months or even for years, that it just changes in flavor,
Yeah.
becomes more interesting and more,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's super interesting flavor. And I've made tonic from it. I had china bark and cooked it with some other spices. I can't remember which exactly. And made it a tonic to use for. I was doing this tonic project for a company that were developing wild tonics. And yeah, that was delicious. And then you can use it for cocktails. You can use the shrub for cocktails as well. I'm not a big fan of cocktails, but for those who are. um, yeah, exactly. And then you can use, so then you only use the liquid, but you can save the berries and use them like in cakes. Imagine making a really dark, gooey chocolate cake, and then you add some rowan berry. That makes a really interesting combo. Chocolate and rowan. It's nice.
Right.
Yeah. I've dried them to use in like granolas or in cookies or bread. What else have I done? I don't make jellies because I'm not a big jelly eater, but you can make jams and stuff like that. But I love the oxymel and the honey thing.
All right. Thank you for sharing that.
You're
Yes.
welcome.
You mentioned previously the rosehip soup. That's really typically Swedish,
Yeah.
I think. And you say soup, but it's really like more of a sweet thing.
Yeah.
Okay, tell it.
Yeah.
About it.
So when I was a kid, we would have very common thing, rosehip soup or cream of rosehip, but it was made from a powder that came out of a paper bag. And it was very sweet, and we ate it with little almond cookies. So, and cream or ice cream. Very yummy, very sweet. Now, if you make the real thing, you take the rose hips and remove the little rest left over from the flour and let them simmer in water for maybe 15, 20 minutes. And then with the seeds and everything. And then you take a blender and blend it to a soup, and then it becomes really gooey because all the seeds are in there. And you go, "Ooh, I can't eat this because the seeds are like gravel. They're really hard. Plus, they have little hairs on them, which are itchy in the throat."
Oh, it's terrible.
I know. Ooh. And so then you take a sieve and put it over a bowl, and then you take a spoonful at a time of the sort of roasted porridge and put it in the sieve and strain it. I take a spoon and sort of go push, and so that the liquid or the cream of rosehip comes through the sieve into the bowl, and then you can throw away the seeds in the compost. And then I put that in the freezer because then when I use it, I can decide how to flavor it. Do I want to use it for dessert? I can sweeten it.
Yeah.
Or I can use it in a dressing. with oil and vinegar, or a marinade. So it's super delicious, and it's of course full of antioxidants and vitamin C. And the mix shouldn't boil; it should just simmer, because otherwise you destroy the antioxidants. But yeah, so that's really easy. And yeah, some people, I've done this once, but it's so much work. The seeds they have a really precious oil in them, and they're really rich in antioxidants. You can buy roast.
How do you oil?
I know.
Kitchen supply.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, you can't do that. But with the seeds, after I had them simmer and made the rosehip cream, I dried them on very low temperature in the oven, and then they become a little crunchy, and then I mix them in a blender to a powder. But it's so much work. It's yeah, you can do that, but I still do.
I've cooked up rose hips before and then just strained them, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I love to just put a little bit of salt in there and then just use it as a replacement for a tomato, like on a
exactly, like ketchup
or yes,
yeah,
just with some spices.
because it's not so sweet. It's
no,
not,
it has,
right?
like tomato also has this little bit acidic thing, but also a sweet thing, especially if you boil it for a longer time with a pasta sauce. So I think it's a really interesting flavor.
Roasted pizza, that's nice. Oh, I've had what was the other berry we talked about?
The rowan berry.
The rowan berry. I had those on pizza with goat cheese and nettles. That's really yummy.
Right.
As well, speaking of pizza.
Rowan berry.
Yeah. So I know. And the rose hips, of course, you can use them just as an infusion. You don't have to make a soup. But it is delicious. You can make ice cream from it. And so that's yummy.
Wow. So,
and I think that
berries,
no, I'm sorry, but I think this is also part of the benefits is that first, it makes you really creative, inventing recipes, and it's a sense of satisfaction, which I think is good for health, because nowadays we can buy anything. We don't even have to cook our food anymore. We don't have to sew our clothes. We don't have to build our furniture. And when we do make something with our hands, I'm a knitter. I used to knit since I was a child, and that satisfaction when you put on your own scarf that you made, or you built the chair or whatever, or bring home food from nature and cook it. There is a satisfaction in that. I did this myself. That's very self-empowering. And I think that is super important today, when we basically, all we have to do is push buttons all day.
Yeah. And I think there's another thing as well and this is what I like. Some of my friends are into Ayurvedic medicine or like traditional Chinese medicine. And I think if you cook for yourself, especially with wild plants, you also more have attention to what is it that my body needs today. Like, what is the weather like? What am I feeling like today? Like, oh, maybe I have a bit of a runny nose, or, maybe I feel a little bit tired, and then just adjusts what you are cooking for yourself or for your family. And I think in the Western world, this is a factor that has almost disappeared.
Yeah, it is. And that's why I think Ayurveda is such a great, I'm not, I'm a little bit familiar with TCM, but not deep. But I've exposed myself more to Ayurveda, and eating local foods in season is very much a part of Ayurveda. So it's, and also, of course, learning the dynamics with cooling and heating and drying and wet and moisturizing and all that. That's adds a whole dimension to herbalism, of course.
Yeah, and we've been talking a lot about
I know.
berries, and there is, for me, I don't know. I've never been to Sweden, but
Come.
there is a Swedish thing with
Oh,
berries. I don't
yes.
know. Um, so you have like wild
Uh-huh.
strawberries and wild blueberries,
Uh-huh.
which we also have in Belgium. But then you also have like Lincoln.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Cranberries? Oh my gosh. You don't have them in Belgium? Oh my goodness. Well, that's like foraging for berries and mushroom is a very Swedish thing. It's what we do.
Mhm.
And that's good. That's the way many people get their nature connection. So the lingonberries are quite mm, mm, uh, a bit, I want to say acrid, a bit little sour. So they're often made into jam to be more It's not something we really eat raw. Like blueberries, you can just put in your mouth right
Yeah,
away by the mouthful. I put more in my mouth than in my bucket when I go out and pick.
same here.
But I know it's hopeless. But and that's when they taste best. So
Mhm.
um, the lingonberries are better cooked and delicious. Make a lingonberry pie with fudge, or using them with food, like a jam is a very common thing. Meatballs with lingonberry jam and mashed potatoes is like, that's Swedish traditional farmers' food, you know, um, which is a very strange thing to many people, is eating something sweet with, salty food,
Yeah, in Belgium we do the
savory.
same with applesauce.
Ah, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah. So, and also you have a bit of the same climate and maybe history with like farmers. You took what you had in season. And then you had the applesauce, and then you had the
Mhm.
pork and or whatever.
Mhm.
So the lingonberries, my grandfather would always eat his overnight oats with rårörda lingonberries, which means that you take them raw and mix them with a little bit of sugar, as you stir them with sugar. So that's because they contain a natural preservative. So um, you can actually preserve lingonberries in a jar with water, and it'll keep a really long time in the fridge. So uh, the stirred the lingonberries that are stirred with sugar raw, they will keep really well, and then you get a really even fresher taste of the lingonberries. So that was his, like, milk, overnight oats, and raw lingonberries for sugar
Mhm.
breakfast. And what were the other ones? Oh my gosh, to me, cloudberries is a luxury because I live in Stockholm, which is far from the
Mhm.
north. But I was up once there, uh, going cloudberry picking with a friend, and I thought I was in heaven because I'd never seen them real before. This is maybe 10 years ago. And I mean, I had seen them like on a plate or in a shop, but
Mhm.
never on the
Mhm.
ground. I'd never picked them. And it's just one berry on each little plant. Whereas in, blueberries, kind of 50 blueberries on
Mhm.
one plant. But here's one, 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 one. And you go, and the ground is quite wet where they grow. And on a good day where there's a lot of cloudberries, there's like a yellow field and you have the air up there in the mountains is so wonderful. So to me, that's really something extraordinary. And then to eat them with just cream, plain, natural, like that, is
Mhm.
amazing. Um, and you can actually eat them with, you can, like with the lingonberries, with a little bit of sugar, and you stir them and eat them with cream. And that's a very common dessert up there.
I love berries.
I know,
I
they're
love sweet.
amazing. And, they make you feel so rich. In August, harvest time is such a it's such an abundant time because where I live, where I have my country house, there's a farm. Some friends have a farm and they grow a lot of vegetables. So, when they harvest, there's the carrots and pumpkins and tomatoes and lettuce and squash and everything. And in the forest, there's the roseberries and the lingonberries and the rowan berries. And it's like, it's such a time of abundance,
Uh-huh.
which is really
Yeah.
gratifying.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes when I'm experiencing this in my garden and the hedgerows here, I think, oh, there's not enough time to
Oh,
pick it all and to, you just have to make choices sometimes.
yeah. And that's something I've learned over the years is to make those choices. I don't need to make 25 different tinctures.
Mhm.
I've learned which ones more or less I need over the year. Same with her, so
Yeah.
in the beginning, I would make 30 different oils and lots of tinctures because it was so much fun, and pills
Mhm.
and honeys and oxymels and this and that. But then you have to use them, and you can't pick more than you're actually going to use up.
Exactly.
But you can put
Yes.
in the freezer. So
Yeah, the freezer is really good for
yeah,
and especially for berries. Yeah,
yeah,
because they keep so well in the
yeah,
freezer. Yeah.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. And the berries are great for shrubs too, or
Yes.
oxymels. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, that's right. So, is there a thing you think the government could do
Mm,
to help restore this connection between people
mm,
and plants?
mm. Schools start with the kids.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think it should be a part of the kids' education. They spend so much time in front of their screens, but they should spend more time in the forest or just growing carrots or something, and learn about plants for sure. And I've been working a little bit with children and foraging, and teaching them very common, easy to identify plants. They learn so fast. It's amazing. And then the kids love to teach their parents, you
Exactly.
know?
Yes.
So that's a beautiful thing. And if you exactly. So if you have that knowledge from childhood where you feel safe in nature, which I am blessed to have, not everybody feels safe in nature. So that's also a learning process. So that's one thing. And I also think that if like forest therapy or spending time in nature um, with a therapist, or on your own, could be something that people who are burnt out or recovering from sickness, if that could be part of if they could get a recipe,
Hmm.
you don't need a recipe to go out in the forest, but sometimes you just need for an authority to
To tell
tell
you.
you, okay, or you need to go with a therapist. Forest therapy is great. It's great medicine. It's used in Japan.
Uh-huh.
Uh, a lot, and in other parts of the world, in South Korea, Thailand. Yeah. So using nature as a recipe for recovering and treating very depression, and I
Hmm.
think that will be an amazing thing, because once that connection clicks, it never goes away.
Yes.
You know.
Yes, that's also what I experienced myself. If I look back on my childhood, I was like my childhood and then my teenage years,
Mm.
I was actually a really lonely child. And then I
Mm.
discovered the plants and I never felt alone
Exactly.
anymore. Yeah, it clicked. It's exactly the way you
Yeah.
describe it. And it never goes away. It's like
Yeah.
something that is installed inside of me in my essence.
Yeah.
And it's part of who I am. And it will
Yeah.
never, ever go away.
No. And like you said, you hit it right there about the not feeling alone, because that a lot of people suffer from that today, from
Hmm.
feeling disconnected and feeling. And I mean, myself, I live on my own, I work on my own, I spend a lot of time by the computer, by my kitchen table, and sometimes I don't meet. I mean, I meet people every day because I have neighbors, but I spend a lot of time on my own, and sometimes, yeah, that can get very lonely. But when I do go out in the forest, it somehow just goes away,
Hmm.
if nothing else, and at least temporarily. And I think that's so it's great medicine. It
Hmm.
really is.
Yeah, more people should experience it.
Yeah. And once they start going out in the forest, maybe they start meeting people they can go out in the forest with, and they won't be so lonely anymore. Yeah.
So, one question that I ask to all of my interviewees. So, as a herbalist in Sweden, are you ever called a witch? And I'm asking
Yeah.
this because people keep telling me, hey, Lieve, you're so lucky to live in this day and age because you would have been burned alive if you lived
Yeah.
in previous times. Is it the same in Sweden?
Yeah. And they say, oh, you're a witch, but I'm not a witch. I have great respect for people who call themselves witches because they have a certain knowledge that they're interested in that hasn't appealed to me, which is very intricate and deep and I'm sure important in many ways. But that hasn't been my path. I'm not a witch. I use herbs for maintaining health and as part of a sustainable lifestyle. And yeah, but it's true that women and men with knowledge on how to use plants, they were burnt on the stakes, and that could have happened to us, absolutely, because they weren't necessarily practicing Wicca practices. They were just healers, doing what you and I do, teaching people how to use plants to stay healthy. But no, I'm not a witch. And sometimes it can bother me that because that's a whole different profession and path. But I guess because it's so new to people, and like plant blindness, it's like, oh, you work with plants, you're a witch.
Yeah, it's like they have to categorize.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't want to be categorized. Sometimes I work with plants. Sometimes I'm a writer. Sometimes I'm just hanging out with my friends. I'm just me. I'm a herbal, and I'm a nature and forest therapy guide. But I do a lot of things. But yeah, you're right. It's like people need that categorization and distancing, perhaps, because it seems so strange. And it seems like the Wicca whole thing is growing, and I see more and more people calling themselves witches on Instagram, and I'm sure has healing benefits for them, and that's great. But it's not what I do.
Yeah. So listen, if people want to find more info about you, about your work with plants, where can they get more info? Like a website, social media accounts?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, and you can find me at Life by Lisen. And I'm sometimes I post a lot, and sometimes I post not so much. I try to be fairly regular. And then I have a website called lifebylisen.com where I post, you can read about my books. They're in Swedish. Some of them have been translated, but not to Dutch, but to Polish and Norwegian and other languages. But and also about my workshops, which I do here in Sweden. So this year I'm focusing a lot on a new book, which I will announce more about later in the year, which is very fun. Yeah. So so that's where you can find me. And if you're in Sweden, stop by and say hello. Come to my workshops at Rosendal or something.
All right.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
And thank you for reaching out. This is fun. Foragers unite.
Yes.
Yeah. Stay wild. Thank you so much, Lieve.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
And to you, WYLDE, that has been listening, thank you for being here. I hope to see you back with our next episode. And in the meantime, keep nourishing your wild soul and keep powdering your nose with dandelion pollen. Bye.
Word.
A warm thank you for listening, WYLDE. Are you feeling a wild itch after this episode? Well, just head over to wildplantforager.com and feel free to connect with me on social media. I'm looking forward to the next episode. I hope you'll be there. But for now, just Go outside and follow your wild heart.